So how do you even begin to describe something that's infinite, all-powerful? Well, you got to use human words, right? But what happens when those very words kind of trap God in a cage of human logic? That's what we're digging into today, this fascinating debate that really asks, does our language for God accidentally make the divine seem, well, a little too human?
Okay, let's start with something super simple, something from the real world. Think about this sentence. How can I drive the car when I don't have the keys? You get it instantly, right? We all know what that means.
It's all about logical necessity. The way that sentence is built, it implies a really simple rule. If you want to drive the car, well, you're going to need the keys first. It's basic cause and effect, something we deal with every single day. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. What happens when that exact same logical structure shows up in the Quran, but it's being applied directly to God? I mean, the phrasing is identical. And believe me, it sparks this huge theological debate. So let's break down exactly why. All right, so first up, a question of logic. We're going to break down the core challenge here, and it's all rooted in a really literal, logical reading of just one verse.
So this whole argument really hinges on the phrasing, the grammatical construction of this one sentence. See, the person challenging this argues that, hey, language has rules, and those rules create meaning. And the meaning they're getting from this verse, well, it seems to put a very human-like limitation on God.
In this slide just lays it out perfectly, right? The challenger's point is this. If the first sentence, how can I drive the car, logically means I need keys, then the second sentence, which uses the exact same structure, must logically mean that God needs a wife to have a son. And you can see the problem here. For an all-powerful, infinite being, the whole idea of needing anything, well, that's a massive theological hurdle. Okay, so let's flip over to the other side. How do believers respond to this? Well, their defense completely shifts the conversation. They move it away from grammar and logic and pull it into a purely theological framework. In the first response we see isn't actually a counter-argument about logic, not at all. It's a very serious warning. The speaker is reminded, hey, you're being recorded, not just for the internet, but by angels, for a future day of reckoning. And to really get the weight of that warning, you have to understand this term, Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is the day of judgment in Islam. So you see, the defender isn't treating this like some fun intellectual debate. For them, this is a matter with actual, eternal consequences. This brings us to the core of the counter-argument, and it's this. You simply cannot apply human rules, not our logic, not our grammar, to God. The whole premise of the question is seen as flawed from the start, because in this view, God operates completely outside the system we live in. The entire defense is built on these foundational beliefs. First, that God is witr, one, unique. Second, that there is absolutely nothing like him or his creation. And third, that as the creator, he doesn't need to create in the same way his creations do. He doesn't follow our biological or physical rules.
And let's really zero in on this concept of witr. It's so interesting because it's not just about the number one, it implies the state of being that is absolutely unique, totally singular without any possible comparison. And honestly, this one idea, it's the cornerstone of the whole theological defense.
So what we have here is one argument coming from pure logic and grammar, and another one coming from pure theology. And as you can probably guess, this leads to a classic case of two sides just talking past each other. They're playing by completely different rulebooks, and their arguments never really connect.
But the challenger, they're persistent. They kind of brush aside all the theology and just circle right back to their original point. They're demanding an answer based on the plain, simple meaning of the words in the verse. For them, the text is creating a God with recognizable, earthly proportions and earthly needs.
And what's the defender's response? It's not to break down the sentence. It's to restate that core theological principle. God is one, nothing is like him. So you have one person arguing about grammar and the other arguing about metaphysics. It's like they're in two different conversations. All right, so this brings up a good question. Is this just a one-off debate about a single verse? Or does this tension, this clash between literal human-like language and the idea of a transcendent God show up in other places too? Let's check out another example from a different discussion to see if this pattern holds up. This time, the issue isn't about having a son. It's about having a physical attribute, something you and I have. And look at that, it's the exact same dynamic. The challenger points to a very literal, very human-like description, So Allah has a hand, I have a hand, correct? But the defender's response is immediate. No, because nothing about your hand compares to his. You see it again? A recognizably human feature is described, but then immediately explained away as something totally different, something transcendent and incomparable. So all of this, these arguments about wives and hands and logic, this isn't just some abstract theological disagreement. No, it points to a really deep philosophical problem, right at the heart of how we even talk about the divine. You know, the key takeaway here really isn't about who won or who lost the debate. It's the fact that these arguments reveal a profound and maybe even unsolvable problem with religious language itself. And that brings us to the fundamental question, right? Think about it. Our language evolved to describe our world, things like cars and keys and hands and wives. So is it even possible to use these finite, earthly tools to accurately describe a being that's supposed to be infinite and transcendent without running into these kinds of logical knots and contradictions? And this is really the thought I want to leave you with. In the very attempt to make God understandable using our human concepts, does Scripture risk creating a deity that's sort of undone by his own description? A God that becomes recognizably imperfectly human, one with earthly needs and maybe even mortal flaws that just can't hold up to the claim of divine perfection?